Hello and welcome to Mandibil. This is the next installment in my series where I deconstruct Keith Frankish's lecture series, The Case Against Qualia, and or what's it called? It's not called The Case Against Qualia. It's called, excuse me, I forget the actual title. Illusionism. I think it's called Illusionism, but it's been a while since I did the last part. I've been, busy doing other stuff and sort of been a little demotivated by this droning philosopher. But, I like to finish what I've started. And I might also consider getting, more quickly ahead and not stopping at every 10 seconds and so on. Try to get to more important points and in a more umbrella-like fashion with bigger overview and rather than particular little points. But, this is first impressions and there's a lot of things that goes on in your mind in the first impression scenario, in my opinion. And I kind of cherish first impressions because those are that's where you get your deepest sense of, fallacies, manipulation, sophistry, and so on. When you watch it the second time or third time or fourth time, it's never the same. It's just like watching a movie for the second time and the third time. It's not the same, right? You might, in the second and third time, you might see things you didn't see the first time because you were, bogged down in these first impressions. That's another story. But what I want to get to in my deconstructions is when I have a notion that there's something here, right? I want to roll with it, right? I want to run with it. And otherwise I wouldn't get to it, right? So I think that maybe it's a sign of being a decent philosopher that you actually have these inputs, reactions to something, right? And you shouldn't reject it. You shouldn't just accept it as your emotions and your sort of something that triggers you, let's say, right? That's because there's something wrong, but at least there's something that triggers you and you respect that you are being triggered and you are taking it seriously, right? So that's what I trained myself or said to myself whenever I get a notion of something that seems out of place or whatever, or a good argument for that matter, right? If there's something you said, there's something about this that tells me there's something good here, right? That's the other side of the coin, you could say, right? So it's always on what side of your own philosophy is this, that which you are deconstructing or commenting or reading or whatever, right? You could say I'm reading and listening to this while I'm commenting and deconstructing, right? So it's also kind of a reading experience, you could say. So is it worse or better than your own philosophy, right? Usually, in my experience, or from my point of view, it's usually worse than my own. But that's a subjective, relative understanding, right? But at times, I feel that I'm very good at getting to the point, getting to the red thread of things. The story, the things have to hang together, right? And that's the biggest problem I have with most philosophers. They don't have the full story and the points don't hang together. It's like there are these 25 disciplines within philosophy and I have to reflect on them. No, that's not what philosophy is about, right? You could say to some extent, but it's a complete story in a sense, right? And where most philosophers, if not basically all philosophers, falls through is they don't have a complete picture and they don't have a coherent story, in my opinion, right? And there are contradictions and sort of jumping to a conclusion as if things are given and all these things, right? It's so prevalent in all the things I've been deconstructing so far, right? Most notably, maybe Stefan Molyneux, who is basically a crackpot, right? But also Bernardo Castro, who is a far superior philosopher compared to Stefan Molyneux, but still, right? Keith Frankish is also in the same sort of, I have this pet subject that I'm cherry-picked out of all these subjects that you can have as a pet subject within philosophy, so I can, suck on the tit of the university, being a professor or whatever, and spend the rest of my days thinking about this, which cannot get to a solution about, right? It's just a waste of time. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of resources. Go do something that is productive rather than, this kind of stuff you could do in your spare time, man, right? Just like I'm doing. So, and it's also a problem which is more or less implicit sophistry is what you get from tax-funded philosophy. You could say maybe independent universities who are hiring philosophers and so on, they are not exactly precisely tax-funded. On the other hand, it's a complete system, right? They rub shoulders with taxpayer-funded philosophers. They are going to whatever seminars and webinars and it's all one big corrupt pile of parasitical nature, right? So I'm rambling a bit here, but maybe it's because I want to get into the mindset of this kind of deconstruction. It's been a while, and and I have jumped back 40 seconds or so compared to the last one, just to sort of connect the two, right? So I'm out of the context of the last part, so I don't remember what we were talking about there. But let's see if I can get a foothold in this one. So let's head in.
Now, again, Dennett's point is that neither Chase nor Sanborn can tell introspectively which of these options is correct. Just by sort of focusing on the experience when they taste the coffee, they can't work out which of these options is right. They can't divide up the process into the pre-reaction part and the post-reaction part. All they know is that they're not enjoying it in the way that they did. Now, you might think that science could help out here, could help to adjudicate between these options. Perhaps neuroscientists could scan Chase and Sanborn's brains, and if they found that there had been big changes in the early taste processing mechanisms in their brains, then that would tend to support the idea that their qualia had changed, whether or not they thought they had. On the other hand, if psychologists were to test their reactions to other tastes and to other drinks, say, and other foodstuffs, and they were to find that their reactions had changed across the board, that they no longer reacted in the same way to many other kinds of taste, to many other kinds of foods and drinks, then that would be reason for thinking that their reactions had changed, again, whether or not they thought they had. But Dennett argues that this wouldn't work where the changes are quite small and clustered around the middle point between supposed qualia production and qualia reaction. And we'll see more about that in a moment when we look at the Cartesian, Dennett's claims about the Cartesian theatre. Okay, well, there's one way in which science could settle this. Scientists could identify some event in the brain, in the sequence of taste events in the taste processing system, and decide to call that the qualia. That's when there's firing in that region of the cortex. They might say that the sensory cortex. That's what we're going to identify with the qualia, and then they could certainly tell us whether or not there had been changes in those in the nature of those events. But then, really, this is just redefining qualia as some brain process. It's taking qualia away from the world of subjectivity and what it is likeness, and just using the term to describe to label certain events that are associated with that in the brain. So that doesn't seem like a satisfactory way of resolving the issue. Okay, so here's the moral of that story, as Dennett draws it at the end of the example. He says, Chase pretends to be able to divorce his apprehension of the qualia, the taste in ordinary parlance, from his different reactions to the taste.
I'm a little baffled that maybe I lost the train of thought here, but the moral, why are we talking morals when we're doing metaphysics? It's just a sign of bad philosophy, in my opinion, right? As I've mentioned a lot of times before in my previous videos and presentations on my metaphysics, and which I extend further into epistemology and ethics, and in my deconstructions, most notably on Stefan Molyneux and Stefan Molyneux, it is that you have to settle metaphysics before you can start to talk about what is knowledge, right? Which is the philosophy called epistemology. That you have to understand your experience in order to label that part of your experience which you call knowledge, right? So if you haven't settled what you mean by this experience, it's all sorts of cherry-picking knowledge, right? I would go as far as say at this point in my thinking or in my philosophy that if you do very coherent metaphysics, it's almost like there is no need for epistemology. It's almost like knowledge jumps right out of your metaphysics. Maybe that's a point on epistemology, that epistemology is sort of the more you need to screw around in epistemology to get any kind of idea of knowledge is the extent to which you haven't done sufficient metaphysics, right? If you haven't done sufficient metaphysics, you are dragging all those problems into epistemology, right? And that makes epistemology that more complicated. And if you then start to do ethics, right, then you're dragging the problems or unsolved stuff in metaphysics and epistemology into ethics. And that's why you get things like meta-ethics, which is so stupidly complicated that nobody in the right mind would attempt to use that as any kind of foundation for doing ethics, right? So you're just sort of dragging along all the unsolved problems further down the line. And also what I was actually trying to say is that you have to do sufficient metaphysics in order to do epistemology. And in order to do ethics, you have to do epistemology. So it sort of bites its own tail back in line of your philosophy. Okay, so if you're doing metaphysics, then you're not doing epistemology yet, right? And if you're not doing epistemology yet, you're not doing ethics yet. So you're not using any terms that or thinking or anything like that approaches either knowledge or morality or ethics, right? Otherwise, you're not doing metaphysics, because that comes later when you have settled metaphysics. So these kinds of, and look out for that. Look out for it. If people are doing what could basically be described as metaphysics, and they're using terms that should be about epistemology or ethics, then they don't know what they're doing, right? They're just screwing around, throwing around terms. They have no understanding or not a sufficient understanding of the limitations or the scope of what they're trying to do. And I think it's a problem in this kind of academic pet subject mentality. He has Frankish and maybe Bernardo Castro has this metaphysics pet subject. And it's like they're thinking, if I can just solve this, everything else is just given to me, right? No, this is just a small part of it's an important part, right? But it's just a part of the whole picture of philosophy. In the end, you need to have some kind of understanding of knowledge and all these things, and ethics in order to get around among people, right? Mostly for your own sake, right? So it's a long chain of thinking that needs to lead to this kind of this moral principle that you can work from, which is sort of how do you approach interacting with other human beings and other the whole world for that matter, right? So when a term like the moral, it may be just some copy paste stuff he's doing here, right? I don't like that. It's lazy. I would, if I was doing metaphysics, right, I would immediately remove that and say, no, I can't talk about morality or anything that remotely points in the direction of morality. I have to use some other title for my slide, right? He doesn't seem to be aware of this, right? And that's a sign of a bad philosopher, in my opinion.
I suppose instead that he had insisted that precisely because his reaction was now different, the taste had changed for him. So when he told his wife the original tale, she said, "Don't be silly. Once you had the dislike, you changed the experience." And the more he thought about it, the more he decided she was right. So what he can be sure of is that the experience has changed. He doesn't enjoy it anymore. But he can't distinguish the taste component of that experience and the reaction component. So we'll look at some more cases to underline that moral.
Moral? I don't know why it's called. He needs to call it moral. I want to pause it so I can look at the text there. Okay, it sort of fades because of the video player in YouTube. But, okay, Chase is a person, pretends to be able to divorce his apprehension or recollection of the quail, the taste, in ordinary parlance, from his different reactions to the taste. Now, when text is this kind of complicated, right? It's also a sign that it's more important for the writer to be sort of up on high and using difficult, complicated, convoluted terms to make potentially people say, okay, I guess I just don't understand it because I'm too stupid, because this is so intelligent philosopher. I guess he or she is right because I'm just too stupid to understand this fancy language. Maybe this is just a trick to make you think that this person knows what he or she is talking about, right? Because I don't know what the hell he's talking about here. Pretends to be able, Chase, the person, pretends to be able to divorce his apprehension or recollection of the quail. Is that qualia? The taste in ordinary parlance from his different reactions to the taste. What the fuck is that, man, right? All these fancy terms are not, explained or anything like that. And that's also sort of an arrogance, right? That I'm just throwing fancy words at you, right? So also it's also a way to control the narrative, throwing fancy words at you, so you have to get to understand the language rather than the author trying to make sure that you understand it the first time over, right? Okay, suppose instead that Chase had insisted that precisely because his reaction was now different, the taste had changed for him. When he told his wife his original tale, she said, "Don't be silly, once you add the dislike, you change the experience." And the more he thought about it, the more he decided she was right. He decided she was right? Is that a kind of reasoning? So is this, you can have the same taste, but your reaction to it can be different. And that difference, does that indicate a different taste, or is it just the same taste interpreted in a different way? Or something like that. Well, how the hell would you know? your recollections is not the same as tasting, right? Having a direct experience of taste is not the same as having a memory of a prior taste of the same kind of object, right? A memory of taste is not a fucking taste, because you don't have to shove something in your throat in order to have that memory of that taste. I can sit here and think of oranges and the taste of orange, and I have sort of a faint sort of mental recollection, or whatever the term is, of that kind of taste. But I don't need to shove something in my mouth to have the direct taste. This is also the human distinction between the idea and the impression, right? The impression itself has a higher vivacity, and you can't change that impression, right? And that's also the gray area he's going into by saying, but you can have a different reaction to the taste. So what? It doesn't change that there is a taste, right? Your reaction to the taste has nothing to do with the taste, right? He's trying to switch it over that, okay, your different experiences is independent of the taste, but so the qualia, which is the taste, is not that important. The only importance is, how do you react to the taste? What are your emotional reaction to the taste? Well, who cares? I don't have your personal experience of the taste of orange. But because there is a certain ability to say there's a connection between an orange and a taste of orange. So when I give you an orange, we can discuss the same kind of experience because it stems from the same object, right? It's the object that is interesting, not the taste of the object, right? Because in fact, we can't even know if we have the same kind of qualia, right? But maybe we have the same qualia, each of us, from the same object, even though those qualia might be different. But when you taste the orange, I taste my version of orange, and you taste your version of orange. But because possibly you have the same qualia each time you taste that orange, and I have the same qualia, even though those two qualias might be different, we are referring to the same object, which is the taste of orange, right? Through the qualia.
Now, another intuition pump from Quine and Qualia.
Sort of intuition pump. That it's like, it's also manipulation, right? I am inventing a new idea called intuition pump. And this sort of, okay, so I have to accept that there's something called intuition pump because somebody has invented this new idea, right? And it's sort of, it's a sophist way of getting you to accept something that is sort of cherry-picked to get, you don't get the whole picture of this, right? Sophists are good at cherry-picking arguments that fits the dots they want to connect, right? This is the oldest problem in arguments and in politicians. They always sell you how good this thing will be with that, and glossing over completely all the bad sides of this. They only serve the good side of things, right? Oh yeah, let me steal your money so I can save you from the world, right? So this is one of the oldest problems in arguments and philosophy, for that matter, right? And it's sophist in nature and manipulative. When you cherry pick certain terms and you cherry pick certain, but in this small example, you see, it might point in direction. Okay, so I'm right. That kind of manipulation, right? No, you have to, that's why it's so fucking important, as I kept saying again and again, that you have a reduction base. And maybe it's necessary to do the Cartesian doubt exercise in order to get there. Because what is your starting point? Otherwise, there's a high risk that you're just going to cherry pick whatever reduction base you want, and then you just connect the dots to get where you want, right? If you use the Cartesian doubt, you start from your everyday, and then you just remove the bad apples until there's only good apples left in the basket, right? And that ends up in something, in at least from Descartes' point of view, in I think, therefore I am, right? And that might be, modernized a bit, that kind of approach, but I'm pretty much, on board with that, right? It's a very, very good exercise to do this, right? And forget about the demon thought, right? The demon thought experiment. That there might be some demon out there, and that's what a guy like Stefan Molyneux gets so hung up on, this demon. And if he can refute the demon, he doesn't have to listen to Descartes or be any kind of Cartesian doubt or any skepticism about knowledge or anything. It's like just refute the critics, and therefore I'm right kind of approach, right? That's also stupid, right? There's so many fucking stupid philosophers out there. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I constantly try to better my philosophy and go out in the real world and have interactions with people and see, okay, so this is how it works, and this might be how it works, this is how people work, and so on. You can't sit in your own echo chamber at home and think you can think your way to everything. You can think your way to a lot of things, but you have to have some everyday relation in order to get your philosophy to function, in my opinion. It's a very good idea to have that, right? So there's a lot of things. You have to be sort of the Aristotelian approach of virtue ethics has its. I'm not on board with virtue ethics as a moral principle, but the whole idea of becoming the best and most balanced version of what you are, right? That's a good approach to become a functional human being and get your mind in the right your mind folds. What's it called? Your mind into the right mentality. I think a lot of philosophy has to do with cleaning up your mind, right? Know yourself, as Socrates said, right? Getting rid of all your habitual thinking and all your propaganda and all the things that mommy and daddy told you in order to get you to comply, and all the shit that your mind has been infected with, right? And that's the first big hurdle is, be critical, be skeptical about all the things that you know, and then when you get to the bottom of it. The last question is, but what does it mean to know something? Well, then you become a philosopher, right? And cleaning up the shit that is in your mind and getting rid of all this unnecessary baggage, that is the first big hurdle in becoming a good person. Don't mean good in a moral sense, but rather a functional, complete person, you could say, right? Because the way your mind has been screwed with influences how well you are, how well you live your life, how you approach your life, and those around you and those you spend time with, right? So this is all this qualia business he's doing, right? He's spending 7 or 8 hours or whatever explaining this thing is basically a waste of time, in my opinion, right? Because it seems like he hasn't done the sufficient housekeeping of his mind in order to be in a rigid thinking box, right? He is what's it called? I have a Danish term for that. I don't know what he's an academic, you could say, right? He's one who has found a way to avoid manual labor by using his mind and finding some small area where he can pretend to be very knowledgeable and then sit and try to solve a problem that can't be solved, right? That's basically how I see these kinds of academics, right? Okay, let's get into it.
Is is one of inverting spectacles. This is one that I particularly like. A classic 1950 experiment, two Austrian psychologists, Ivo Kohler and Theodor Erisman, showed that people can adapt to wearing spectacles that completely invert their visual image, either from left to right or top to bottom. When they first put on these spectacles, they're completely disoriented. They can't. They bang into things. They drop things. They can't do simple things like pouring a cup of coffee. They're completely at a loss. But after a while, they gradually begin to adapt, and in time they find that things are kind of okay again, and they can go about their lives just as normal. Here's a picture of Kohler wearing inverted glasses, inverted spectacles that invert his visual field vertically. And he's adapted to them, and here he's riding a bicycle down the street perfectly happily. And you can see some film of this experiment and the adaptation process at the link that I've given there. Now, Dennett has a question about this. How did the subjects adapt?
But why it's still the same qualia? Just because you're screwing them around and inverting them or mirroring them or whatever it's called, it's still the same qualia, right? And, you know, the human mind can adapt its to whatever, to some extent it can adapt to things that are moved around in a different way than usually, right? But I think there's a delay that you have to be adding some kind of reasoning to it, right? I remember when I was a kid and I lived, my family lived on a farm, and we had a lot of, we were building soapbox cars, what's it called? Playing football, crawling in the trees and go fishing. We were always outside, maybe that's why I'm so connected to reality, because I just grew up in reality, so to say, right? And my neighbors, the guy, another boy I played a lot with, right? At some point, his bigger brother had made a very sort of complicated soapbox car with a steering wheel and some kind of what's it called? A stick from the wheel, the steering wheel, down to the front wheels of this with wiring or rope or something like that, right? There was only one problem though, and that was if I turned the wheel left, the car would go right? And if I turned it right, it would go left. So he has done the right thinking, but he's just, at some point, switch it over. So it became the opposite of what you were. But then we were sort of, okay, but it still works, right? So we just have to remember every time we need to go left, we will turn right. But it was very difficult because instinctively, without thinking, I needed to, if I had to work from instinct, if there's suddenly a tree appearing, I would do the wrong thing, or the right thing, which would turn out to be the wrong thing, right? If I had time to think of it like I have to avoid that tree over there, I would be able to say, okay, I have to do the opposite, and then I could do it, right? So if it's instinctively, I would think that it's a matter of how long time do you have to reason about it in order to get to the point. And you might be narrowing down that time frame to something that almost feels like it's normal to have things inverted or whatever, right? It wasn't very popular, that soapbox car anyway. So it was something like, it was actually interesting that the front wheels were put on a board, and at each end of the board there was a wheel. And then the stick was in sort of a socket where the wheel, the steering wheel was up here, and there's a stick down to somewhere out in the front of the car. And then there were rope of wires, some kind of, I think, what's it called? Not a rope, but a thin rope, right? A string, a thick string, from each of these ends of the board where the wheels were, and up to this stick, or broomstick maybe. So when you turn the wheel, you will turn the broomstick, and that would pull the string of that front board where the wheels were. So if you pull this way, it should pull the towards you. But the point is, when you want to turn this way, right, you want the wheel to also go that way. But that's the opposite of what is happening when you do it this way. And I don't think we could figure out any way to do it differently. So we just have to say, okay, with this steering wheel, we can only, when we turn left, we go right, and so on, right? So maybe this is a challenge for, this is what, boys do, right? That's, I remember that kind of fondly, because it was sort of we were sort of brainstorming, can we find a way to, what if we then, this string, and then get the string on from this side, but over to the other side, so that when we pull this way, it drags the wheel from that side, and it very complicated, right? But the short of it is that maybe this is a different scenario, because, well, I don't know. It's also a combination. He is combining an experience with an action, right? You don't necessarily have to have an action of an experience, right? And it's also taken for granted some way or another, the way he's presenting this, that there's a certain way it has to be presented that he knows about, right? And he's suffering from the materialist metaphysics, that you are, as I also pointed out in earlier parts of this presentation of his, which I remember doing, right? That the outside is known, and then you have a qualia of that outside, right? So he's this kind of misinterpretation of what you can actually state without going with axioms. So, okay.
Now, if we suppose that vision involves a mental image of the world, a mental image of the world that you're directly aware of, then there should be two possibilities here. We know that the pattern of light rays hitting the eye has been inverted. So presumably that has, if there were this internal mental image, that will have been inverted. And that's why the subjects are disoriented. So there would be then two possibilities. One is that the subjects have managed, they can't change the pattern of light hitting the retina. That's fixed by the spectacles. So then the two options seem to be that they've reinverted their mental image of the world. Glass has caused their mental image to invert, and they somehow managed to mentally reinvert it so that they can continue responding to it in the way they used to. The other is that they've left their mental image inverted, but inverted all their reactions to it. Now, these, if there are these...
I don't know, it feels like sophistry, this, right? It's trying to pull out an argument that is not really, but it sort of tries to push you in a certain direction, right? That you sort of, it doesn't matter about the qualia. What matters is what you do with the qualia. And I understand there is a point there, but you need the qualia in order to react to it, no matter how you screw around with them, right? If you don't have any qualia, there's nothing to react to. So the reaction to the qualia says nothing about the qualia, right? It is just so convoluted and weird, this, in a way, right? Because it's, how can you screw around with things and sort of, but that's not the point, in my opinion. Because, and I'm trying to also second guess what is going to do with this, because what is it then that is an illusion? Is it the qualia that is an illusion, or your reaction to it? I still don't get it, right?
If vision does involve awareness of a mental image of the world, then these should be real, two real possibilities. As Dennis says, did they reinvert their visual field, or did they invert their reactions to it? Would the subject be able to answer that question? If we asked the subject which of those they did, would they be able to answer? I don't know if any of the subjects were asked this, but I suspect they wouldn't be able to answer. I suspect they would say, well, I don't really know. At first, everything was mixed up and confused, and I couldn't manage to find my way around the world properly. But gradually, it's come all right again, and now I can.
But is the question also inverted then? Is it only the visual field? What about the rest? Don't you have to invert the sound also? Because then you're violating the picture, right? It's like to fit a vertical painting in a horizontal frame or something like that. And say you're screwing around with. I mean, I don't know. It just feels manipulative, right? It's like I screw with the system and create something that is interesting, and then I'm drawing conclusion about that system that wasn't screwed with, right? It's like if I have a Rolls Royce and throw a spanner into the motor and say, wow, that interesting things are happening here, right? I created a whole new car, right? Interesting stuff is happening. No, you just screwed the fucking Rolls Royce, right? You're not creating a new car. You just screwed with it, right? Oh, interesting new sounds coming from this interesting new car. No, you're just screwing around with it.
I can align my responses with what I'm seeing without any problem. But what happened, I don't really know. It's just that it was strange for a while, and now it's okay again. So I suspect that subjects wouldn't be able to give a clear answer to that. Is it even a good question? Is that even a good way of looking at the situation? To think about mental images being the right way up or the wrong way up. As Denny points out, it would lead to an odd...
Also, what's the difference between a classic experiment and an experiment? Classic is just, okay, I have to take it more seriously. Is that sort of sophist? It's a classic, so you need to be more, right? How did the subject adapt? Did they re-invert their visual field, or did they invert their reaction to it? Would the subject be able to answer this question? What question? There are two questions. How did the subjects adapt? Did they do it? Is this an extension of it? Would the subject be able to answer the question? If they have been born with an upside down, how would they know it was upside down? How do you know that it's not upside down from the beginning? And when you put on these glasses, it actually becomes the right side down, or. How do you know these things, right? You're just screwing around with things and think you have created something. You're just throwing a spanner into a Rolls Royce and thinking you are creating a whole new, much better car.
To quite a surprising...
Or actually, maybe he's saying, I don't understand how this motor on this Rolls Royce works, so I'm going to throw a spanner into the motor and see what happens, and aha! So I can't answer this question why this motor sounds this way, so there's no reason why it should sound some other way. Something like this kind of argument, right? Doesn't work, in my opinion.
Speculation. How do we know that other people see the world the same way up as we do? There's this. There's a common thought experiment involving color inversion. How do we know that other people see colors the way we do?
Now, be careful with the terms "no." As I said, "no" is something you can only start to use when you're doing epistemology. And you can't even say, I know this before you've done epistemology. Now you're talking about knowledge, right? This guy doesn't know what he's doing, right? You can't talk about knowledge. You should understand this, right? You're a fucking academic, man, right? I'm just an amateur philosopher here. Amateur in the sense that I'm not being paid. for it, right? I'm doing it because I want to be a good philosopher, right? How do they know? But you can't know about, you can only know about your own experiences, right? You can never get to all of that shit. And this is also a big problem in these kinds of neuroscience and all this. They think they can put some electrodes and use a computer, and then there's some blemish on the screen that explains what's going on in there. No fucking shit, man, right? No, because it has to be an qualia to you that you interpret in a certain way, and then it's no longer the thing that is going on in that mind. God damn it, right? The answer is so obvious when you can see it, right?
The same color qualia
Or the rejection of a possible answer, right?
we do. Maybe bananas look to you the way that blue skies look to me and so on. Well, if we think that mental images have a determinate orientation, the right way up or the wrong way up.
That's another point I want to get to. This thing being so hung up on the qualia and trying to explain everything by rejecting these qualia or whatever it's going for. The qualia is only there so you can objectify things, right? Or they're only there. That might be a bit of a stretch. But the most important things to get to knowledge, in my opinion, is, yes, you have qualia, but it's the combination of these qualia that makes you objectify things or conceptualize things, like elephant or banana, right? The important thing is not what kind of qualia that banana has. The interesting thing is, do we both objectify banana? Apparently, because you're talking about banana as if I understand what there's a banana. That's important. It doesn't matter the qualia because they are subjective, right? The only thing that can be objective is that we agree that it's a banana. If you say it's not a banana, fine. Then we don't agree on that banana, right? It may still be yellow, but you're calling a bicycle maybe. Okay, fine. But then it's important that it's a bicycle rather than a banana. And you should say, in my opinion, I would say, well, if you say it's a banana and I say it's a bicycle, I don't want to interact with you concerning this object, right? Because we apparently disagree fundamentally about the concepts we are identifying. And the concepts is what you can agree upon, because that's binary. That's either you experience banana or you don't experience banana. No matter the qualia. So the qualia is out of the question. It's off the table, because now we're talking about concepts.
Then we should be able to we should be able to entertain a similar thought experiment. Maybe other people see the world inverted compared to the way I see it, but they've got used to it. They've adapted to it. Now that should be a perfectly coherent possibility if this way of thinking of experience is right. Now, then it's just that few people would go along with that. It seems rather naive to suppose that that we have mental images of the world that are determinately oriented one way up, that have an intrinsic.
Okay, I think I will stop here. This is getting close to the 1 hour limit, and I want to stay below 1 hour. At least I got like 10 minutes further down the line in this lecture. Maybe the next one will be a bit quicker, right? So let's say we are stopping here, and see you in the next one. And by the way, share, like, and subscribe. Check out the Discord link below, possibly, right? Otherwise, have a nice day. See you in the next one.